Hi, welcome to the iNLP Center. My name is Mike Bundrent, and I'm so glad that you decided to watch this presentation, which contains information about personal development that has been largely swept under the rug and avoided by mainstream mental health and even personal development. The concepts here that were discovered in the early part of the 20th century have been largely ignored, and yet when you watch the video, you're not going to be able to help but see things about yourself that you've never seen before. Suddenly, behaviors perhaps that you've had, or feelings, limiting beliefs that you've had that seem so familiar to you that you don't like, that you haven't been able to shake. All of a sudden, you'll see them in a new light, and the way to move forward and make changes in your life will become clear. That's the experience of so many people. You wonder why everyone doesn't know this stuff, or why it's not being taught in the mainstream. So I'm thrilled to be able to make this presentation for you about psychological attachments. You're going to get so much out of it. In fact, it's so important to us that we have made the presentation you're about to watch, we've adapted it so that it is the first module, the very first module people learn in our NLP training courses. And I typically have my life coaching clients watch it as well, and it factors in pretty heavily to the work that we do together. So enjoy it. I'd have some note-taking devices available to you because you're going to want to try to see yourself in this presentation and find out the degree to which it does apply to you. So I'll join you again briefly at the end of the presentation, and we'll do a wrap-up. So here's what we're going to address today. How beliefs relate to personal empowerment and self-sabotage. How something called deeper psychological attachments maintain cycles of self-sabotage. And how to end the attachment cycle for greater personal freedom, choice, and success. So let's talk about beliefs. Your beliefs are your individual interpretation of what you see, hear, and feel in the world. The interesting thing about beliefs is that we often present them as if they were facts. Let's look at some differences here. Belief: rain ruins all the fun. Now there's 1,000 different ways you could interpret that fact. It's raining outside. One way is to conclude that raining ruins all the fun. A fact: my father moved away when I was 7. The interpretation of that could be, I must not be lovable since my father moved away. Again, there may be many, many different ways to interpret the fact that my father moved away when I was 7. I must not be lovable is one possible interpretation. We can't help but make interpretations. Emerson said, we're born believing. A man bears beliefs like a tree bears apples. It's a very natural thing to do. We make our interpretations of the world, often unconsciously. So let's talk about why beliefs are important. Well, you look at this picture and you say, I think all else being equal, I know what the best road to take is. Why would we ever take the wrong one? Why would you go through the storm if you don't have to? So often we make unconscious, or we unwittingly make choices that take us unnecessarily down the wrong road. And unconscious beliefs and the attachments that hold them in place have everything to do with why, all else being equal, we have two choices. We choose the one that brings us the most grief. That's why the material that we're presenting here today is so important. So this is Scott. By the way, Scott's a fictitious person, although his story and all the stories we're going to tell today are based on real-life examples. Scott's the guy whose father left when he was 7. He believes that his father left because he's unlovable. Now, as an adult, Scott wants to get married and start a family of his own. But he doesn't think he's lovable. In fact, he continues on with his life. He's not reaching out to try to find that special someone. And if he does find someone, he believes that she will abandon him like he was abandoned when he was a child. When he does start to get close to someone new, he gets a feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach, and he breaks off the relationship, rejecting her before he gets hurt. Unconsciously, he thinks this is inevitable because deep down he carries that old belief that he's not lovable. So Scott's goal, he wants to fall in love, he wants to start a family and be happy. His limiting beliefs may be, I'm not lovable, I will be left, I don't deserve to be happy. Scott's limiting beliefs determine his perceived limitations, and the limiting beliefs so often win. With these beliefs, Scott's not going to think it's possible to have a real and lasting relationship. With this setup, Scott is going to sabotage his efforts to meet people. So self-sabotage, the term that we love to hate, is when we unconsciously work against the things that we consciously want. And this is at the root of so many problems. It's at the root of so many failed efforts to make progress in life. Self-sabotage. Most therapies attempt to deal with self-sabotage by changing limiting beliefs. We figure if we can get rid of the limiting belief, we'll only be left with positive beliefs, and there you go, problem solved. And there's a lot of different ways people approach belief change work these days. And a lot of these methods can work, and they do work some of the time. But there's a reason why they fail much of the time, and we're going to cover that. So the first method is inner work. Inner work is essentially changing internal dialogue, imagery, and feelings, modifying your internal experience. Basically, it's a fancy way of saying change your thinking. Instead of telling yourself negative things, tell yourself positive things. Instead of saying, I hate exercise, tell yourself, I love exercising. And these kinds of things. The problem with inner work is that most of the time it's a temporary solution. There's a deeper root. And so people go through, they do some inner work, it changes their inner state, they feel better, but then that feeling wears off. And again, it's because it has deeper roots. Another way, direct suggestion. Basically, instead of telling yourself good things about you, somebody else is telling you good things about you. If you go into a therapist and say, I feel like such a worthless person, ultimately you're going to be told, you're not a worthless person, you're a great person. You're a real worthwhile person. And you may even be told that, given that suggestion, while you're in a hypnotic trance. And the idea here is that it's supposed to replace the negative thoughts that you have about yourself. Again, rarely sticks. You may have some experience with that. Immersion in experiences of the past. We figure that to address our limiting beliefs, we go back to our early childhood experiences and re-experience them. Now, this can be a good thing. It can help us to uncover repressed emotions. It can help us to get things off our chest, and so forth. But just re-experiencing old experiences does not mean that the limiting beliefs are going to change. It doesn't mean that you're going to end self-sabotage because you went and re-experienced old experiences. Behaviorally, we attempt to address a lot of things behaviorally, just get ourselves to do something different, or provide behavioral evidence that our belief is wrong. So if I believe, I'm just a lazy person and I can't help it, then I might be instructed to go out and do a bunch of productive things and create evidence that I'm not lazy and therefore convince myself, and so on and so forth. And the problem with that is most often I can get myself to do it temporarily and feel okay, but I'm having to work against the negative belief in order to prove the negative belief is wrong. And again, most of the time it doesn't work. And the reason that most of these methods fail is that they're only addressing the stem and the leaves of the problem. And it's sort of like a weed. If you don't remove the root, but just the stem and the leaves, the weed grows right back. And that's the way it is with limiting beliefs. They just sprout right back up. And we have to address this deeper root of the problem. And this is where we get to psychological attachments. The attachments deep within our psyche are where these limiting beliefs, these negative behaviors and emotions are attached. And there's several different characteristics of attachments. They are, an attachment there when an attachment is there when a negative behavior or belief or emotion is consistent. When we anticipate it happening, we know it's going to happen again and again and again. It's sort of like, I know I'm going to be afraid when I go do this or that or the other thing, and we even fear the fear. We're just in full expectation that it's going to happen. They're developed in childhood. In a funny kind of way, we're attracted to them because they're familiar. In a funny kind of way, we're attached to them because it's what feels like home. We can't imagine who or what we would be without these negative behaviors and beliefs and sort of repeating these negative experiences in our life. And we may even find safety or a strange satisfaction in them, and they are deeply unconscious. If these kinds of characteristics are showing up in your life, if you have a negative behavior or belief or emotion or an experience in your life that keeps showing up again and again and again, it comes from an attachment. So I'm going to talk about the types of attachment. There's 3 types of attachments. There's an attachment to control, to deprivation, and to rejection. These types of attachments, we've categorized them. There may be many different kinds of attachments, but just to give you examples, concrete examples of how they play out, because again, we're dealing with the root here. This is the part that for so many people, nearly universally, is underground. We're not used to seeing it, what it looks like, how it plays out. And when you do see it, it makes so much sense. So let's take a look at what the control attachment looks like. Let's say you grew up with very controlling parents or an authority figure that you gave a lot of power to. And the rules might have been very tight and the punishment for breaking the rules very severe. You lived in fear of breaking the rules, and when you did break them, you were hurt physically or emotionally. So, from very early on in life, you learned to expect to be controlled and even depend on it in order to keep yourself in line. You anticipated it, you made decisions knowing it would happen, and therefore you developed this attachment, this way of being in the world that was under the control of someone else. Now, you didn't like being controlled, you probably hated it. However, unconsciously you expected and depended on it. And as you leave childhood, you take your attachment to being controlled with you into the adult world. Again, you may hate it. You may even consider yourself a rebel or anti-authoritarian. You have authority issues. You don't like to be told what to do. Nevertheless, you have a knack for attracting controlling people. And you may have this pattern in your relationships where you're controlled, you fight back against the control, only to be controlled again. This is the nature of power struggles. And let's give you an example of how this can play out in a relationship between John and Mary. If you look at this slide, this probably explains enough. But let's look at the scenario. John and Mary, they have plans to go out to dinner with friends. While Mary's getting ready, John sits on his laptop surfing the internet. He knows it's getting close to the time to go, but keeps telling himself that he has plenty of time to get ready. Finally, when he hears his wife coming down the stairs, he runs to the closet, throws on some wrinkled old clothes, and slides into his flip-flops. And he says to himself, I can dress however I want. Now, you can guess what Mary says when she sees him. She's like, geez, get upstairs and get some decent clothes on. We're going to a nice restaurant. Gosh, what are you thinking? And so John, he resents his wife's reaction, but he goes upstairs, he upgrades his attire, comes back down in his flip-flops, though, and she intervenes again, trying to whip this guy into shape and make him presentable. Now, this stresses John out. When they're out to dinner at the restaurant, he drinks too much. Again, Mary has to intervene, remind him, you got to drive home, buddy. And by the way, stop acting like such a lush. It's embarrassing. Now, John has an even greater desire to rebel and drink, and so on and so forth. This is the pattern in their relationship. John, in this case, he's encouraging others to intervene and make demands of him by virtue of his behavior, by acting like someone who doesn't know how to manage himself, from dressing inappropriately to drinking too much. John is inviting someone else to come in and take charge. All the time, he's unconscious of this fact. Consciously, he hates being controlled, and that's really what he focuses on, the hatred of it. Unwittingly, he invites control into his life by showing that he won't govern himself. Now, from the roots of this control attachment, several beliefs may grow. 1, women are controlling. 2, it's no use trying to do what I want. 3, I'm trapped. Attachments are ironic because they generally bring on the thing we resent the most. People with control attachments are generally the people who feel the most controlled. Now let's look at the deprivation attachment. Let's say Debbie was a child. She grew up in a household with both parents working. The father was always off to work. The mother was a nurse who worked 12-hour shifts several times a week. When Dad was home, he was busy with his hobbies and responsibilities at church, so the kids were pretty much left on their own, and because of the lack of parenting, Debbie didn't get a lot of her emotional needs met. Ultimately, Debbie was deeply saddened by her unfulfilled and empty life. Over the years, she just stopped hoping for fulfillment. She repressed her sadness and accepted inner emptiness or numbness as her way of being in the world. Now, as she grew up and went on to date guys, she married a man named Carl, who was really attentive to her in the beginning, and she was really hopeful. But soon she began to notice the lack of attention from Carl because he was mostly just focusing on his job. Debbie figured, that's just the way it goes, so she settled, and she quietly suffered. Over the years, Debbie continued not to express her concerns or her need for attention and love from Carl. Consequently, he didn't see or fulfill them, and this led to more disappointment and eventual resentment. Debbie began to see Carl just like she saw her father, as a hopelessly disinterested and unavailable man. Because of her unmet and unfulfilled needs, Debbie chose to fill the void with a habit of watching TV and overeating, things that don't fulfill. And by doing so, she unconsciously invites further emptiness and loneliness into her life, making herself less and less interesting to Carl even. Now, Debbie goes through her life making decisions that cause her to feel deprived. And she does it unconsciously. She's not connecting the dots. By choosing to be with a man she didn't know well and who is emotionally unavailable, by attempting to fill her void with food and TV, she remains chronically deprived. By not expressing her needs or making any demands of her husband, she unwittingly chooses this cycle of deprivation in her life. Of course, she doesn't realize what she's doing. She thinks she's doing the best she can under the circumstances, but her friends on the outside see the truth and they're frustrated with her because she won't take their advice to actually do something proactive and move her life in a more happy and fulfilling way. Now, you may wonder, someone actually has an attachment to feeling unfulfilled? They have an attachment to deprivation? It sounds like a very weird thing to say. It sounds twisted. The reality is, it's true. Debbie, if you look at the things she's doing, she's spending her life watching TV and overeating, maybe avoiding social situations, avoiding other people, not telling her husband what she needs, what she wants, making demands. These are all things that lead directly to feeling deprived. That's what she's doing. So she must have an attachment to it. And it makes sense because this is the world that Debbie grew up in. And she's recreating it now. It's like she has a part of her that's so familiar with emptiness and deprivation and being unfulfilled that she doesn't know to choose any other way. Or to choose a fulfilling life would seem like it's not her. And so she's attracted to the depriving way of being over and over again. And so having a tool or a strategy or a good diet to go on or a good way to connect with other people, having those tools and that knowledge and that awareness doesn't necessarily overcome the deeper attachment to being in the world the way she always has been. And that's the level that we're talking about here. Unless we deal with that deeper attachment and recognize it for what it is, we don't have a lot of hope for overcoming it. Now, from the roots of her attachment, she may experience limiting beliefs such as I can't expect others to satisfy my needs, I don't matter, men are jerks, and her behaviors are generally going to be away from expressing and fulfilling her needs, and that's the deprivation attachment. The rejection attachment, let's take a look. A boy, Timmy, grows up being bullied by his older brother, Frank. Everything Timmy does, Frank either makes fun of or puts him down for. Frank tells Timmy he's stupid or he's overly critical when he tries to accomplish something. It would seem like Timmy would just stay away from his older brother, but he looks up to him, and he wants Frank's approval, so he just keeps trying. Timmy gives Frank a lot of power, and for that gets beaten down time after time, year after year. As a result, even though Timmy hates criticism, unconsciously he's come to expect it. It's the world he lives in. In fact, It's a requirement for Timmy to endure criticism if he's going to relate with Frank. Timmy generalizes his tendencies to crave approval in spite of being unjustly criticized, and soon enters many new social situations anxious and ready to fend off the criticism and rejection. This creates a lot of social anxiety when you're going into a new social situation and you have the full expectation that others are going to criticize you and judge you. That's the attachment. In his romantic relationships, Timmy also craves approval. The first couple of dates usually go well until he stops getting the amount of attention that he wants. And then he gets serious too quickly. He tries too hard to make the girl like him. The moment he starts to feel they're not interested, he calls them, he buys them flowers, he dotes on them. Essentially, Timmy smothers them because he's desperate for their approval. And so he ends up pushing them away and feeling rejected, unwittingly getting exactly what he hates the most. He can't understand why women don't want him because he's such a nice guy, but that's exactly what he's getting. He's getting rejected. Now, because of this rejection attachment, his self-confidence is low, and his limiting belief is that he's not good enough to deserve a nice woman, and he doesn't get it. His want is to be approved of and loved, but unfortunately he's not aware of his attachment to rejection, so he keeps trying too hard to please people who don't appreciate or value him, only to feel ostracized. Now, from the roots of this attachment, he may develop several beliefs. I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'll always be alone. People with an attachment to rejection often end up doing so much for other people who don't appreciate them. So all of this may be obvious as we look at it from the outside, but when you're in the midst of your attachment, it's really difficult to see. But from the outside, we can see very obvious answers. For the control attachment, you want to tell people, stop doing things that require you to be controlled. For the deprivation attachment, it's to meet your own needs in a straightforward way and tell other people what you need. For the rejection attachment, it's to do things that encourage self-respect and genuine acceptance by others. But for the person attached, it's so hard because their attachment is their reality and they're not connecting the dots. They're not identifying the root of the weed so that they can pull it. But that's what's necessary in order to be free of it. So we end up in what we call the attachment cycle, where these deep negative attachments that we're attracted to, the world, the reality that we know as a child that we often seek over and over again, these attachments form. The attachments manifest negative beliefs, behaviors, and feelings. We don't achieve what we consciously want because we end up sabotaging it. And in step 4, we try to change without recognizing our deeper attachments. So here we may implement all kinds of tools and strategies and techniques. We may be so desperate that we try all kinds of things, magic bullets and quick fixes and so forth, just hungry for change. But we are not connecting the dots. We don't see that, wow, I'm actually seeking these things out. It's sort of like if my leg really hurts, and it hurts over and over and over again, and I can't figure it out. I just want the pain to go away, but it won't. And then somehow I notice that all along I've been punching myself in the leg without realizing it. And as soon as I realize it, I can stop punching myself. It's really that simple. But so often we don't. We remain blind to our deeper attachments, and we remain in this cycle of hopeless self-sabotage. So we've developed a process that stops the attachment cycle. My wife Hope and I, we developed this process that stops the attachment cycle. It's called the AHA process. You're going to see a video of Hope here in a few minutes telling you her experience with this process. The A stands for awareness. This is 90% of it. It takes willingness, it takes sometimes humility to be open to the ideas presented here. And not everyone is ready or willing. These are actually pretty radical ideas. They're not mainstream. In fact, they've been suspiciously swept under the rug by modern mental health. When psychiatry put itself in charge of mental health, a lot of really interesting models of genuine insight got swept under the rug and lost. But that's another issue when we talk about the real history of mental health. At any rate, it requires openness to these ideas because they require a radical amount of personal responsibility. They don't allow you to casually make others responsible for what goes wrong in your life, and that's the norm today. People routinely blind themselves to how they create their own problems as a self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again. Basically, all the self-deception ends. Becoming aware involves not just the negative feelings or beliefs, but that you're attached to them. that you're at some level willing to recycle those negative things in your present life and maintain the attachment like unfinished business. That's the awareness that begins the process of letting go. So imagine that you have a control attachment, acknowledging that you have unconsciously been doing things day in and day out that send the message to others that you need monitoring. I mean, seriously, are you keeping your commitments, doing your part around the house, acting socially appropriate, acting your age, are you reliable, and so forth? Basically, are you regulating yourself so that other people don't have to regulate you? And to the degree that you're not regulating yourself, you will be sending the message that others need to. That's the nature of things. For someone with a control attachment, this kind of thing is a huge discovery. When you get it, you can now be aware of when you're doing those things and make a real choice. Do you want to continue to invite others to intervene in your life or not? I mean, this is a profound shift. The second step is to halt. Once you are aware of your attachment cycle, when you're in the midst of it, then it's to stop. This is essential. Getting off autopilot so that you can consider your options. I mean, at this point, you can step back, look at how your autopilot thought process is going and where it's leading. And is it going somewhere positive or negative? Is it going toward the sun or is it going toward the storm? All else being equal, do you want to go toward the storm? It's to stop that process and see it. And then third process, the second A in AHA is to act, to consciously choose an empowering option. With this process raises your consciousness, and with raised consciousness comes new perspectives and choices. When your behaviors are the results of unconscious attachments, you can't control them. When you make what was unconscious conscious, then you gain choice. You can't consciously choose to change something that you're not aware of. But when you put it on the table and start to sift through it, then new possibilities open. And once you're aware, then you have real choices. And this is what brings about change. You're free to act on your conscious wants and get them. So we're going to watch a video now of this AHA process in action. And we're going to watch my wife, Hope, tell you about an experience that she had recently before a live webinar that we gave. And we played this video at the live webinar. And it was just great. I think you're going to like it. It talks about how she applied this AHA process in her life and in her interaction that she had with me.
Hi, I'm Hope. I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about how I've incorporated the AHA process into my life. I've always known about the idea of self-sabotage and have worked, like you probably have, on diffusing negative beliefs. But until Mike discussed with me the whole idea of the attachment theory, I didn't realize that I was self-sabotaging myself as much as I was. I kind of thought it stopped at the negative belief section, but apparently it goes a lot further, like you've seen today. So since learning about my deeper attachment and my numerous actually deeper attachments, I think we can have all three of them and they can go all over the place, but we'll focus on one that I dealt with last night. So let me tell you about what happened last night. Seriously, just last night. So, Mike and I yesterday are working to get the whole webinar thing together for you guys yesterday, and I'd probably spent myself about 9 hours so far yesterday working on it. Additionally, I had homeschooled my younger son for a few hours, and I had just made dinner. I was making homemade pizza with special dough from Mike, his gluten-free dough, measuring it all out right and everything like that. So now, after all of that, it's 7 o'clock at night or whatever, and I'm standing there washing the dishes, and he's across from me eating his nice little pizza and working on his computer. And I'm thinking, I don't feel like washing the dishes. My back hurts, all of this. I've been busy all day. I start thinking about how it's totally unfair that he should be able to just sit there and enjoy his pizza since I ate my pizza while I was making his pizza. So I'm just thinking these negative thoughts, and pretty soon they start, going on and on and on, snowballing into this thing of me not getting my needs met. I'm thinking how he should have realized, hey, I'm washing dishes, you should be helping too. It didn't even occur to him that he should be helping. And so I'm getting all upset about that, and I'm totally in my deprivation attachment at that moment. Well, then, all of a sudden, which I should be, I've been working on this webinar all day, I realized that what I was doing, and I realized my train of thought and how I got there. So I'm at the first A, awareness. And I go, oh my gosh, I see what I'm doing. I see this whole train of thought. And And so I got to then go on to the H, which is halt, to stop. And I go, okay, I'm noticing it. I step out of it, because when we step out, we can actually see it a little bit more clearly. And I start realizing what I was doing. I was going from, how I was feeling inside about what I was having to do and putting it on him, and start thinking that he's not going to meet my needs, that I can't even ask him because he should technically know what I need, which is not really fair of anybody. And so I went into this whole thing of how I wasn't going to get my needs met. And so I went ahead, I looked at it, I saw it for what it was. I traced my train of thought, and I was allowed to really stop thinking that, think of my choices. And so in my head, I thought, what should I do at this moment? And it requires being so consciously aware of what we're thinking. And so I thought, well, I could just say it. I could just say, hey, can you help me with the dishes because I'm really tired? I could say, hey, my back hurts. Can you give me a massage later? Anything like that. And it wouldn't even take whining or complaining. It's really just saying, hey, can I get some help? No problem. And so in my head, he answered and he said, of course, I'll help you, no problem. Which is generally always what he does anyways. But, I should be able to just say what my need is instead of starting to feel all negative about him in it and start thinking of myself as a victim as well, which is what we're kind of doing, right? So once I decided what I wanted to do, I was able to do the last A in AHA, which is act. So I said it. And I told him, hey, I need your help. Do you mind helping? I've done a lot today and I just really could use the help. I really don't want to be washing the dishes. Do you mind? And he's like, no problem. And I said, my back really hurts. Would you mind rubbing it later? No problem. And so it was really great. And I took responsibility for what I needed.